I'm here at the University of Western Australia, where a book about how Australia was almost colonised by the French instead of the British was launched. Never heard about that before? In that case, let's see what the author had to say. An Almost French Australia is the title Mrs. Noeline Bloomfield gave to the book she proudly launched early this week. The book reveals just how close Australia was to become a French colony and how little we know about it. According to Mrs. Bloomfield, who's also a researcher in European languages and studies at UWA, the French once not only claimed the continent's western side, but made important scientific discoveries and mapped several regions of Western Australia. But the French Revolution in 1789 took over, causing them to leave Australia and leave unfinished what they had started, changing the course of what could have been a French Australia.
I suppose it was mostly an interest in the French names at the beginning. When we first arrived in Western Australia, I noticed immediately that the whole coast was covered with French names, and nobody seemed to know why. When I had asked my friends if they didn't speak French, they hadn't even realised that they were French names. And so I started digging a little bit myself, but I was with 3 children and full-time work, I didn't have a lot of research time. But one of my colleagues, Leslie Marchant, Professor Leslie Marchant, started working on the French names in WA, and that's when I started looking further and realised that there were, I think it works out at over 60, nearly 70 in South Australia and 84 in Tasmania that we know of. So I just followed along after he passed away and continued the research. And it led me in lots of interesting directions, because it not only was the mapping of the names and checking out, why they were there, but the fact that some of them were aristocratic names, others were sailors' names, sometimes they were French names for geographical features, and it was just then leading me backwards and backwards and backwards, deeper and deeper into the reasons for why the French were out here. And it seems that there were various reasons. One of them was commercial, of course. They were trying to look for ports and places that they could water and resupply their ships out in this region. But it was also very much rivalry with the British, because they really didn't want the British to get ahead on everything. And there was very strong rivalry, and some of the time, actual wartime, quite a few wars or battles fought over territory. So it was a continuing saga, and it actually ended up being a much longer project than I thought it would.
This is a part of Western Australia's history that needs to be clarified. To imagine what it was like for the French explorers those hundreds of years ago, charting these unnavigated coastlines, the reefs, not knowing what was around the corner. They were very brave and very exciting times. Many of them didn't make it back to France to tell the story. But this book clarifies the significance, the role that the French did play in our history.
It looks as though it's a really good read. It looks like a really interesting book to read. Some fabulous illustrations, and I'm really looking forward to reading it myself and giving it as gifts.
It's easy to read, the print is large enough, and the pictures are gorgeous.
A lot of kids who aren't interested in history at school often become interested later when they start looking at family history, and especially in Australia, with so many people from Europe, and for many reasons that they came, partly as a result of the war, perhaps maybe family businesses brought them. But all people at a certain stage of their life like to dig a little deeper about their family origins. And I think it's good if they know that this is a legitimate thing to do, and as well as an interesting thing to do. And it's not just for a personal point of view, but also to honour their ancestors, really, who gave them life and who've given them the chance in life that they take often rather for granted.
This is Alexandra Mollo for Undercurrent.